And to talk to us about the agreement and its potential amid evolving geopolitical realities, we have with us Nick Mehta. He is the British High Commissioner to Singapore. Mr. High Commissioner, thank you very much, for joining us on Asia First. So it's the I guess the biggest post-Brexit trade deal, but report after report that I read talks about the strategic element, of the agreement, particularly when it comes to China and Taiwan. So help us understand, when are you going to say, okay, we're okay with that country joining, or wait, we have some concerns?
Let me first say that the UK joining CPTPP is an incredibly important milestone for our partnerships in this part of the world, and it comes on the back of our ASEAN dialogue partner status. And the UK joining means that CPTPP now covers 15% of global GDP and is a really significant trading bloc. So being a part of that creates new opportunities for UK businesses, and it hopefully boosts trade investment with many countries in the region. So I think it's a really positive thing and one that should be celebrated. It will be for the countries within CPTPP to decide future memberships.
You're one of them.
Yes, we're one of them, exactly. But it will be along three basic principles. The first is a commitment to holding the high standards of CPTPP. The second is a track record of compliance with trade regulations around the world. And the third is consensus. It's a really important aspect of it that all countries that are part of CPTPP agree future memberships. And that applies to China and applies to many other countries.
And presumably it has to be such that any deal or any member that comes in is going to be, I guess, beneficial to all members concerned.
I think that's right, yes. And I hope that the 11 existing members will feel that the UK's inclusion is really going to boost their relationships and modernise the agreements that might already be in place. And in some areas, like trade and services, like the environment and digitalisation, I think the UK brings real strengths.
You talked about opportunities, High Commissioner. I saw about trade experts. Some of them argue that the economic benefits from CPTPP could be limited. I mean, they say UK GDP expected to rise by just 0.08% in the long run, compared to, let's say, 4% of the loss due to Brexit. How do you respond to that assessment? And what are some of the steps that should be taken by the UK to fully capitalize on this trade deal?
So our belief is that by joining CPTPP, we will boost the UK's economy by up to £2 billion a year, 2.5 billion US dollars. So quite a significant increase, but that's on the basis of existing membership. We've spoken earlier about an expanded CPTPP in the future and more areas of collaboration. So, I feel confident that actually it's going to be a really significant bloc to be a part of, and will boost UK business opportunities in the future. And
do you have a number on that?
Well, I think it's quite hard to predict what the future membership will look like.
Fair enough. Apart from the impact on GDP, I mean, what trade experts are also saying is highlighting this rules of origin as a key benefit. What does it mean to an exporter? I mean, dumb it down for me. I mean, if I were a UK exporter, how do I use this particular rules of origin to benefit, my business in terms of exporting to all member countries? I mean, make it as easy as possible.
Well, it ensures that exporters that have specific products can export easily to this part of the world. So let me give you the example of Scotch whisky going to Malaysia. Okay. So at the moment, tariffs on Scotch whisky going to Malaysia are set at 80%. The whisky relationship with Malaysia is worth about 32 million pounds a year, about 50 million Singapore dollars. With CPTPP coming in and a new free trade agreement with Malaysia, those tariffs in 10 years' time will be eliminated entirely. So can you imagine the boost that will give to the Scottish whisky industry to this part of the world?
But how is it different from a direct free trade agreement between the UK and Malaysia, for example?
We don't have one. I mean, that's the thing with Malaysia and Brunei. We don't have a free trade agreement. But even with countries where there is a free trade agreement, like Singapore, what CPTPP does is provide the highest levels of provisions. It modernizes the agreements that we have in place. And when many of these agreements were initially put in place, the provisions didn't account for new sectors, digitalization, for example, or new investment relationships. So actually, I think that even for countries where those agreements are there, this is a real boost to our relationships.
Thank you for breaking it down and also mentioning Scotch whiskey as an example. A huge fan. But speaking of trade, there are worries of Trump 2.0, obviously the trade war. But as UK being a trade-sensitive country, what are the UK's biggest worries and some of the strategies to protect your businesses and industries from the potential fallout?
Look, I think we're all waiting to see what President-elect Trump announces on the 20th of January. But our government has been clear in its messaging that we think potential trade tariffs imposed on any country will have an impact not just on the US economy, but on the global economy, and that includes the UK. So we'll be speaking to our US counterparts and urging for free and open trade as the way to increase wealth in all countries. We think that is the right way forward. That's a big reason for why we're joining CPTPP. But let's wait and see before making too many predictions.
Mr. High Commissioner, I mean, does the incoming US president have specific, demands of UK exporters at this time? I mean, The Guardian is saying it's about agriculture, it's about beef, and I believe it was a month ago when a Trump advisor says the UK has to choose between the US economic model or the EU, economic model. I mean, your views on these areas?
So my view, sitting here in Singapore, is that the UK government has been absolutely clear that it wants a closer relationship with Europe, and you can see some of that playing through in the new Prime Minister's engagements. But the relationship with the US is the strongest partnership that we have with any country around the world. And I honestly think that's irrespective of who's in the White House or who's in Downing Street, that relationship will endure. And I'm sure it will be to the benefit of people on both sides. So I don't have any concerns about that at all. But I also think the global engine room for growth is in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia and in the wider Indo-Pacific. And joining CPTPP means that we have access to that and can support the growth mission back home in the UK.
And High Commissioner, I know you've served in southern Iraq, which means you had first-hand experience in the Middle East complex dynamics. I want to ask you about in the wake of the fall of Assad's regime, your Prime Minister welcomed it, but also saying it's too early to change its stance in HTS rebel group. What are some of the signs that the UK will be looking out for before rethinking its stance on HTS? Yeah,
well, thank you for asking about that. I mean, we're all watching issues in the Middle East very carefully, whether it's the terrible situation in Gaza or the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. And on Syria, my Prime Minister met Middle Eastern leaders over the last couple of days to work through what a just transition in Syria will look like. But let's be honest, we should all welcome the fall of this brutal Assad regime. What we want to see now is an inclusive Syrian process that represents the views of all Syrians, that we have a non-sectarian political system in place. But it is quite early to see how that will play out. We've got to hope that whoever is in charge in Syria really respects an inclusive process.
And Mr. High Commissioner, one thing which comes up in relation to Syria is to avoid the mistakes that were made for Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, for example. When, for example, the Ba'ath Party was dismantled, bureaucrats were basically fired. I mean, how important is making sure that, I suppose the technocrats and the people who are running the country continue to run the country and stay in place to ensure that it is a functioning system that continues for returning Syrians and for people who are still there?
I think you've said it exactly right. You want a functioning system that respects all Syrians, all minorities in Syria. There are 370,000 displaced Syrians in the region. My government announced yesterday a £50 million package to support Syrians in the region, but the political process needs to ensure that transition is smooth and respectful of all views.
All right, Mr. High Commissioner, we do have to leave it there. We appreciate you joining us on Asia First here in the studio in person. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Nice to speak to you.
Appreciate it.